Thank you, Ms. Ruby. Good morning once again. Welcome to our fourth plenary session. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our fourth plenary speaker. Dr. Catlin is a best-selling author, international trainer, and keynote speaker. She was named Teacher of the Year in 2010 in Sonoma County, where she taught for 16 years. Catlin earned her doctorate in learning technologies from Pepperdine University. Currently, Catlin is working as a blended learning coach, education consultant, and professor in Masters of Arts in Teaching program at Pepperdine University. Catlin has written a series of best-selling books on blended learning, including UDL and Blended Learning, Thriving in Learning Flexible Landscapes, Balance with Blended Learning in Action, Power Up Blended Learning, and Blended Learning in Grades 4 to 12. She is active on Twitter at Catlin_Tucker and writes an internationally ranked blog at catlintucker.com. Her blog was one of the 2014 honor rolls in EdTech's must-read K-12 IT blogs and ranked in the top 12 educational blogs by Teach100. Participants, please join in welcoming our fourth plenary speaker, Dr. Catlin Tucker. Dr. Tucker?
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here with all of you. And before I jump in, I just want to say that if there are questions or comments or things that you are curious about after today, if we don't get to all the questions at the end, I am very active on Twitter. I'm easy to find online. So if you have something you're curious about, do not hesitate to reach out and let me know. I did want to start, so I want to be honest about how challenging the last 2 years have been for just about everybody in education. And as we think about how do we move forward? How do we thrive in what might be flexible learning landscapes for the near future? I put together a Mentimeter. I put the link into the chat window and I can reshare it for anybody who has their device and wants to open up a new tab and participate on your phone. But the question is for you right now as a teacher, or if you're in a role supporting teachers, what are the biggest challenges that you as a teacher or the teachers you're supporting are currently facing? And what you'll see is 3 text windows when you go to this link. And so you can put 3 words or phrases that for you kind of sum up those challenges, or I like to call them kind of pain points of our profession right now. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to give you guys about a minute to just throw your words into this cloud. And we'll see what words kind of rise to the top, because the words that are repeated by the most people will get bigger and bigger in the cloud. So it will help us to identify the common challenges that we're facing in this moment. So I'm going to mute myself. I will give you just under a minute to kind of throw your words into the chat window and we'll see what surfaces. Okay, you can keep throwing your words in the cloud, but the big words are staying pretty stable. So I think our biggest words in the cloud are assessment, and I'm also seeing authentic assessment being called out, internet connectivity, which is so frustrating when we're trying to work with kids online and engage them sometimes in a remote scenario. Online teaching is in there. We have motivation, which I'm assuming we're alluding to student motivation. We have student engagement, communication, support. So lots of challenges in this moment. And really one of the things that I've spent the last 2 years working on as I support teachers is thinking about how to help them to develop what is a flexible, nimble, adaptable mindset, skill set, tool set. And one of the things that I write about in my book, my last book, which is Blended Learning and Universal Design for Learning, we use this analogy, my co-author, Dr. Katie Novak and me, about wanting teachers to have a mindset, a skill set, and a tool set that is as nimble as the duck boats. So in Boston, Massachusetts, on the East Coast of the United States, there are these World War II amphibious vehicles, and they can ride down the street and then seamlessly move into the water. So they basically can go down the cobblestones and then into the water. And for me, that versatility is what I want to see in a teacher's tool set and in their skill set. I want them to be able to work seamlessly with kids in a physical classroom space and then transition online fluidly. And yet the ways in which we have approached teaching and learning don't give us that flexibility necessarily. For a lot of the teachers I work with, they feel like they need one skill set and one tool set for a learning environment that's in person and a totally different one for a learning environment that's online. And my message is we need one that is versatile and nimble and flexible enough that we can be in any teaching and learning environment and thrive. So my area of expertise is in blended learning. And for me, one of the most exciting things about blended learning and blended learning models is how flexible and adaptable they are. So when I define blended learning, I define it very simply for leaders, teachers, coaches as active engaged learning online combined with active engaged learning offline. And for me, the really critical component is that the student is an active agent in the learning process. They, not the teacher, are at the center of the learning. And so blended learning, the phrase is kind of like an umbrella term. So within the umbrella, there are lots of different models that combine active engaged learning online with active engaged learning offline in different ways. But at the heart of blended learning is a shift in control from teacher to learner. We want to give learners more control over the learning experience, and specifically more control over these 4 elements of their learning: time, place, pace, and path. So they're not likely going to have control of all of these things all of the time. Different models give them different degrees of control over these different aspects of their learning experience. So depending on what model we choose, students might have a lot of control over time and place, but not a ton of control over the path of their learning. Or they might have a lot of control over the pacing and the path, but not of the time and place. So it just depends which of the various models we're using. Now, when I work with teachers, a lot of teachers are interested in blended learning, but there's also a hesitation. This job is incredibly complex and demanding, and a shift to blended learning, it takes time and energy, just like learning anything new takes time and energy. And so I like to highlight the big benefits of a shift away from teacher-led, whole group, teacher-paced learning to blended learning. And there are 3 key benefits that really emerged in my own research. And I think that they benefit students and they benefit teachers. So the first is our opportunity to give students more agency. And when I say student agency, what I mean is giving them more control over their experience because they get to make key decisions about their learning. So as we give students more control, as we give them more agency, over time, that has a really positive impact on their motivation and their willingness to engage. So for those teachers who feel frustrated because they feel like students aren't motivated, students aren't really engaging, then thinking about when can we give them more meaningful choice can actually function to improve those things. The second key benefit is differentiation. So we know that within a classroom, we have a really diverse group of learners, different skills, abilities, interests, learning preferences, language proficiencies. And so the differentiation that teachers do is really trying to get closer to meeting individual and small groups of learners where they're at in their learning journeys. So thinking about what examples, what models, what supports or scaffolds, what level of academic rigor and complexity are the tasks we're giving students? And are we adjusting those for learners who are in different places in terms of their learning journey? That's really hard to do effectively and consistently in a whole group teacher-led lesson. The third benefit is control over the pace of learning. And this is really key because a lot of what I hear when I work with teachers is also frustration about student management, student behaviors that kind of distract from the learning. And a lot of behaviors that distract from the learning actually blossom out of the misalignment between the pace at which the learning is moving and the pace at which the learner needs it to move. So if the pace is moving too quickly, learners don't feel valued, they get frustrated, sometimes they get angry, and they disengage. If it's moving too slowly, learners get bored, they start making their own fun, and they disengage. So as we design learning experiences, where are those moments when we can shift control over the pace of learning to students so that they stay more engaged with the task and feel more confident in their ability to complete the task? Now, as I work with teachers, I think there is a fundamental shift that needs to happen in a classroom around teacher roles and student roles. So for years and years, out of necessity, pre-technology, teachers spent a lot of time at the front of the room unpacking complex concepts, providing instruction, modeling skills and strategies. Those are very teacher-centered designs where teachers really spend a lot of their time in their role as expert at the front of the room, and they spend a lot of energy transferring information from teacher to learner. Now, in blended learning environments, they're much more student-centered. As I said, it's a shift in control from teacher to learner. And really, the teacher is spending less time as expert at the front of the room talking and more time as facilitator and coach, working directly with individual and small groups of learners. It's really in that human side of teaching where we want to spend time. We want to spend our time connecting with and supporting learners. Now, on the flip side, student roles have to shift as well. I see a lot of students who are very comfortable in their role as passive consumers, passive observers in classroom. And in a blended learning environment, if student is active agent, they have to be the ones doing the lion's share of the work, the cognitive lift in a lesson. They need to be the ones doing the thinking and stretching their metacognitive muscles. They need to be engaged in academic discussion and discourse with their community of learners. They need to be making and tinkering and building, especially when we're talking about STEM environments, right? And how do we create space for that? They have to be reflecting, and ultimately they have to be our partners in this learning journey, because we cannot make students learn. We can only create opportunities for them to learn. And so in my work, I often get brought in to work with schools and districts and countries around the skill set, right? The blended learning models. How do we design and facilitate within these different models? Yet for me, the conversation has to start with mindset. There are so many assumptions that educators make about what it means to be a teacher and where our value lies as teachers. And I think that's why some teachers are still spending a lot of time in their role as expert at the front of the room. We have to really start to value the connection with learners, the partnership that is at the heart of learning, if we're really going to make substantive, meaningful change in education. So really the way I want to frame this talk today is talking about mindset, then we'll cover skill set, and we'll speak about tool set, because I think all three work together to help teachers be nimble in a changing learning and teaching landscape. So when I talk with teachers and leaders around mindset, it's really this idea of a partnership. And a lot of the teachers I work with are, quite frankly, exhausted. And the reason they're exhausted is because they are doing the lion's share of the work in the classroom. They're doing the lion's share of the thinking, the cognitive lift in a classroom. And so I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we believe that our students are capable of sharing the responsibility for learning with us? And I know that there are some teachers who might be thinking, no, I'm not confident my students can do this. And so for me, if we don't think students have the skills to share the responsibility for learning, then I think we really need to go back to the fundamentals and think about, how can we build a partnership and how can we help students develop these very important skills that they need to be our partners in this learning? So I anchor this conversation in partnership principles, this need to really proactively develop and then nurture mutual respect and trust in our classrooms, in our work with students. And this isn't just getting to know students at the beginning of the year. It's also thinking about, how do our grading policies, how do our late work policies impact what students or how students feel in our classrooms? Do these policies function to reinforce trust and respect, or do they erode the trust and respect in our classrooms? We also need to be really cognizant of defining why kids are doing something, really stating the purpose and value each time we ask them to engage in a task, so they understand why they're being asked to do it. Engage them in goal setting and try to help them to identify things they care about, things they want to work toward. Open, honest communication. Often communication in a classroom is very one way, and it's dominated by a single voice, and that's often the teacher. So as we design learning experiences, are we giving students a voice to engage with each other, to engage with us as their teachers, asking questions, sharing their ideas? Fourth is regular, timely, actionable feedback. Feedback is truly, in person and online, how students feel seen and supported. And I think too often we spend so much time with instruction, telling kids how to do something, that we often neglect the feedback and the support as they're actually trying to do whatever the thing is we've asked them to do. So how do we lean on blended learning to create time and space for feedback, not at home, but in our physical classrooms or in our synchronous time with students online? 5 is balance of power. So really thinking about and prioritizing student voice and choice, student agency. And then 6, and this is so important right now because everybody in education is learning, everybody is being stretched, everybody's growing, like it or not. And so the more we can demonstrate our commitment to learn right alongside our students, the more safe it will feel for them to take risks and potentially fail in our classes, right? If they know we're trying new things, we're experimenting, we're failing, that makes it feel less scary for learners to do that as well. Now, I realize there are students who don't necessarily have all the skills they need to share the responsibility of learning. And so we have to do some important work to skill build around metacognition. So metacognitive skill building, this is really the process by which we help students to think about their thinking, and to think about their learning in an intentional way. And in many of the classes where I work with teachers and their students, the assumption is that the teacher is the one thinking about the thinking and thinking about the learning, but it has to be a shared responsibility. And I know that metacognition can feel kind of abstract. So when I work with teachers, I break it down into 3 parts. Before a learning cycle, where kids are setting goals, they're planning and strategizing. So instead of just jumping into an assignment, a task, a project, they're thinking through what steps am I going to take and what support am I going to need. During the learning cycle, we want them thinking about their thinking about their learning, tracking and monitoring their progress, and engaging in regular self-assessment to try to think about what is the work I'm producing telling me and telling other people about my skills and my growth. And then at the end of a learning cycle, instead of racing on to the next thing, which I know is very tempting because we don't have a lot of time, but stopping to encourage a reflective practice. So when we think about goal setting, just keeping it simple, but prioritizing what do kids want to work on? What would be meaningful for them, right? It might be a personal goal, academic goals, behavioral goals. And I like to frame it in kind of a where am I going? So what are my goals? What do I want to work toward? How will I get there? What specific actions, behaviors will help me make progress towards these goals? And then how will I know when I've arrived? What will it feel like? Will there be an external marker, an internal kind of sensation when I accomplish this particular goal? And just keeping it consistent, whether it's the beginning of each week or the beginning of each grading period, beginning of each unit or learning cycle, and asking kids to really think about what they want to work toward and have that frame and focus the work they're doing in our class. And then as they're moving through the learning cycle or the unit, can we engage them once a week for 20 minutes in a self-assessment activity? And if we're working online with kids, maybe this is something that happens asynchronously when they have some time and space to engage with it, where really we as the teachers we've identified what are the key standards or skills that kids are working on in this learning cycle, in this unit, and then challenge students to choose a work sample to assess and to think about really critically. If they had to put themselves on a spectrum of mastery from 1 being beginning, 2 developing, 3 proficient, 4 mastery, where would they put themselves and why? Can they explain what is it that I'm seeing in my work that makes me think I'm at the developing stage? And what additional support might I need as a learner? Where am I seeing growth? Where am I seeing stagnation? And this is really uncomfortable for learners at first. And then what ends up happening is they begin to understand themselves as learners and be able to advocate for themselves as learners. That reflective practice that happens at the end of a week, a unit, a learning cycle, we want that to be sustainable, but we really want to have kids pause and say, okay, what did I learn this week? Or what did I learn in this learning cycle? What did we do that helped me to understand this concept or master this specific skill? What goal do I have for myself next week? What questions or areas of confusion do I need answered or support in? So again, it's about having them pause to appreciate what they learned, but also to identify what's still unclear and what do they need more support when it comes in relation to. Because ultimately, I want students to be so actively involved in this work that they're thinking about their learning like they're making a documentary, right? They're not just observing what's happening in a classroom, they're taking pictures, they're videoing, and this can happen in a classroom, in their home environment. They're merging media, whether that's text, images of what they're learning and what they're doing in classrooms and pulling it together. And you might use a multimedia digital notebook to give them a place to pull together the documentation and the reflections on their learning, but really encouraging them to think about what are they doing? What is the impact? What are they understanding? And having a place for them to capture and maybe even publish that for an authentic audience. So they're actively engaged in the process. Because ultimately, what we want to do and what we need to do if we're going to partner with learners is to cultivate expert learners. And an expert learner, the profile of an expert learner is a student who is motivated, they're resourceful, right? They kind of have a sense of what are my resources and what can I lean on if I get stuck? They're strategic, they're self-aware, and ultimately, they are capable of sharing the responsibility for learning with us, their teachers. Once we kind of get our heads around this idea that we don't have to be an expert, we don't have to be trapped at the front of the room. And in fact, maybe our true value lies in the human side of teaching, that connection, that facilitation of learning, then we can start moving into this skill set conversation and talking about utilizing different models that are more flexible. Models that work beautifully in a physical classroom, they work beautifully entirely online, or they work nicely in a blend of the two learning environments. So the question we have to ask is our skill set, are the instructional models we're using flexible enough for any teaching and learning landscape? And a lot of teachers, unfortunately, are still leaning on that whole group teacher-led model. So when I facilitate a workshop, I like to talk about why do we use this model? There are clearly benefits to this model, but I think a lot of us found out there are a lot of challenges associated with this model when we're teaching exclusively or in part online. And when I ask teachers that question, the answers really speak to control and ease of planning, right? It's easier to plan a single experience for the entire class. If we're at the front of the room directing and orchestrating, we can control how quickly we move through content. We can control more of the student behaviors, but we also know we're not meeting everybody's needs. The pacing isn't perfect for all students. Not every student is engaged. So there are challenges associated with this model. And I think those challenges were really exacerbated in the online environment. And same from the student perspective. When teachers are asked, like, what is attractive? What's challenging about this model from a student perspective? They know that for students, this model, it can be kind of boring. It's easy to disengage. Kids don't feel like they have to lean in, take risks, or participate. There's kind of comfort being in the crowd. But what that translates into online is kids who don't turn on their cameras, they don't participate in discussion, they don't engage in group work or the online tasks. And that makes working in an online environment incredibly frustrating from a teacher perspective, because student engagement and teacher engagement are reciprocal. So when student engagement dips, teacher engagement dips. And that has made teaching online incredibly challenging. So there is a whole spectrum of blended learning models, and I would argue lots of different models still emerging and lots of strategies that can fall into this umbrella of blended learning. But the ones I want to focus on with you all today are station rotation model, flipped classroom model, the playlist model, and even the 5Es instructional model. The 5Es instructional model has an asterisk because it's not a blended learning model originally. It was a model designed for the sciences, as many of you probably know, but we can weave together active engaged learning online and active engaged learning offline within this model in a way that I think is so incredibly powerful. And in the last 2 years, I have worked with thousands of teachers from kindergarten all the way through secondary in designing 5E instructional model experiences that are blended learning because they blend that online and offline learning. Now, station rotation is an interesting model. I love this model. And what was fascinating was to see how well this model worked entirely online during the pandemic, or as teachers were forced entirely online with students. So it does just what the name suggests. There are a series of stations and students rotate through them. Classically, there is a teacher-led station, so teachers are working with small groups at a time. There's an online station, and there's an offline station. And the thing that had to kind of be adjusted a little bit in terms of perspective when teachers were online is, instead of thinking of a station as a physical location in a classroom, teachers had to start thinking about a station as a learning activity. So it didn't necessarily have to mean kids were physically rotating in a space. Sometimes teachers were hosting small group teacher-led lessons on Zoom, and kids would go into breakout rooms for the online station and work asynchronously offline at home for the offline learning component. Now, the benefits are applicable whether we are in the classroom or whether we're in an online environment. So it is an opportunity to take what might feel like a large class and create smaller learning communities within that larger class, because you have smaller groups of learners working together, navigating tasks together. It creates dedicated time in a lesson for teachers to work directly with small groups of learners to more effectively differentiate that experience, adjusting the learning activities, adjusting the scaffolds and support, even the kind of level of academic rigor and complexity of the practice and application, so that hopefully that work is within the student's zone of possibility, instead of having everybody working on the exact same task. I love when teachers really prioritize student communication, student collaboration within this model, tapping into the learning community, making sure to insert choice and agency, and then really being aware that we want to make sure students have, at the stations that are not teacher-led, more control over the pace of their learning. And what's exciting is just the incredible versatility of the ways we can utilize these different stations. So the teacher-led station doesn't have to be the teacher talking the whole time. They could facilitate a discussion. They could use that time to give students real-time feedback on work in progress. They can guide interactive modeling sessions. And the same can be said for the online and offline stations. So whether it's a multimedia lesson or online research and exploration, engaging in an online discussion, there's so many different ways to utilize an online learning station. Same with the offline, science and math, these are very tactile, experiential subject areas, and students need time to really engage with each other, to engage with the content in a meaningful way. And this offline station can be incredibly useful on that front. Then you have the flipped classroom model. And the idea with the flipped classroom model really was to take the transfer of information, right? That need that we feel to explain things, and to shift it online with video. And then to use our precious class time, whether that's in person or synchronous online, to guide students in application, extending what they saw in the video and doing something meaningful with it. And often teachers will ask, well, Catlin, what should be a video and what should be small group direct instruction, say in a station rotation? And my message to teachers is, if you're gonna say the same thing the same way to everybody, make a video. Make a short, sweet video and let students control that experience, self-pacing through it. And then let's use our time, our real-time synchronous time with students, for more dynamic experiences, to differentiate, to give feedback, to support, to engage kids in conversation. That's more high value time spent with learners. So the benefits of the flipped classroom model, the biggest benefit is that students get to control the pace at which they consume and process information. They can pause the video, they can rewind it, they can watch it half a dozen times if they need to. And we don't have to say it half a dozen times, which is very exciting benefit of this model from my perspective as an educator. We also, as we make video content, we're creating a growing repository of video instruction and support that students and parents can access anywhere, anytime, Video gives students more control over the content. If you're watching a YouTube video, you can adjust the speed. So if the teacher's talking too quickly, they can slow down the pace of the video. They might be able to add closed captions to read along with hearing what is being said in the video. And that combination of auditory and visual components that make up a video can help increase accessibility. And then as teachers start to create their own video content, one of the things you very quickly will realize is there is some time spent on the front end creating a video, but you will save so much time in the long run because you start to realize how much instructional minutes or how many instructional minutes are spent repeating instruction, repeating models for learners. So if you don't have to engage in that repetitive instruction, you can do other things with that time. Now, I think video is incredibly useful, but we can maximize the effectiveness of video when we build a blended learning experience around it. So I often challenge teachers to think about what comes before the video. Are you going to pre-teach vocabulary? Are you going to have kids engage in a discussion? Are you going to have them, brainstorm questions or access their prior knowledge and surface it? What is going to set the stage for the video content? Then once they've done that pre-video activity, which I love it when that is offline and collaborative in a classroom or collaborative in breakout rooms in an online setting, then they have the video lesson where they should get to control the pace at which they move through the video. So teachers shouldn't be playing videos over Zoom for kids. Let students be in control, pause, rewind, catch up on notes, and think about how are we engaging them as they watch that video? What are we asking them to do as they're watching the video to engage their higher order thinking? Are we pairing it with questions, a concept map? Are we asking them to engage in academic discourse around the video? And then after the video, what are we going to have them do to take what they learned and apply it, practice it, extend it? So the more thoughtful we are about kind of this three-part approach to the flipped classroom, the more effective it's likely to be. The third model, which again, all of these work beautifully in a classroom, online, or a blend of the two. This third one is the playlist model. And just like you might have a playlist of music with a series of songs stacked one on top of the other, the playlist model is a series of learning activities in a sequence. And the goal is to allow students to self-pace through the playlist. So they have a lot of control over how quickly they move through a playlist. You might have checkpoints, you might have due dates for certain sections of a playlist, but the goal is to shift the control over pacing to our learners. And the learning path of a playlist can be differentiated. So you can create a middle of the road playlist for most of your students. Then you can make an advanced version and you can make a more scaffolded supported version. So you really are reaching kids at different levels and making sure everybody can make progress toward the learning objectives associated with the playlist. The playlist is kind of a one-stop shop. So within the playlist, there's on-demand video instruction, there's on-demand models, so that as students hit the need for instruction, that's when they get it. We're not front-loading and doing instruction before the playlist, we're embedding it into the playlist using video. So playlists mix media, they might be reading, they might be watching, they might be listening. We might give them the agency to decide, how do you want to engage with this information? There are different learning modalities. And if we want to get closer to personalizing learning, teachers can build in what I call teacher check-ins or teacher conferences at strategic moments in a playlist. And this is where teachers get to connect with learners and really support individual learners and embrace that partnership. So as students hit a teacher check-in, they meet either in a breakout room with a teacher at the teacher desk in the classroom, and the teacher and learner look at what the learner have done so far in the playlist, and they have a conversation. What might need to be adjusted or added or kind of changed in the playlist to ensure that this student is getting exactly what they need to keep making progress. And that's how we make personalization sustainable, is by creating that space to sit with learners through the process, see what they're doing, make adjustments, have a conversation, and allow them to continue with their progress. So one of my students in my Master's of Teaching program, Diego Torres, created this incredible math playlist. And so on the left-hand side are the instructions, and you'll notice he's built student choice throughout. Would you like to read this article or watch this video? And then on the right side are the places for students to capture their work and share it. There are also these stop signs in the playlist where he invites students. If you're struggling, if you need support, this is time for you and me to meet. He calls it Torres time. He also has built in kind of games and extension activities for students who are progressing much more quickly through the playlist. So playlists are incredibly versatile. Again, like a video, they take some time to put together, but then as students are self-pacing through, a playlist might run a couple of days or a couple of weeks. That time is time teachers are spending supporting individual small groups of learners in their progress, which is some of the most meaningful work I think we can do as teachers. It's in those moments when we will feel most effective. Now, sometimes teachers get a little anxious about, how do I design a playlist? So you can actually use the 5 E's instructional model to design your playlist if you want. So you can have an engage section of your playlist, an explore section, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So the 5 E's were initially designed for the sciences, yet what I have found is it's a beautiful strategy for creating student-centered inquiry in any subject area. So I just want to highlight what is at the heart of each of these E's and pair it, some of them, with a metacognitive or a thinking routine designed to help students become more aware of their thinking through this process. So the first part of the 5 E's, the first E is engage. And really what we're trying to do at the engage stage is kind of pique our students' interest. We might use media to do that. We might get them accessing and sharing their prior knowledge so we can figure out where they're starting. We might want them generating questions and driving inquiry or brainstorming around a topic. So it's really trying to hook their interest, leverage their curiosity, and maybe reveal, what do they already know about this particular question if we're using an essential question, or this topic if we're focused on a particular topic. And the strategies teachers can use are discussion, offline in a classroom, asynchronous online, writing prompts, concept maps, brainstorming activities, but really getting kids leaning in and excited at the start of an inquiry cycle. So Harvard's Graduate School of Education developed a collection of thinking routines, and I love these routines. I think they are such a beautiful way to increase that intentionality around the way students think about their thinking. So one of my favorite routines is a see, think, wonder. So if we're going to start a 5 E's, piquing student interest with images, graphics, video clips, maybe we challenge them at this early stage to tell us, what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And have each student grab a slide on a digital slide deck and surface their thinking at the start of the 5 E's. Second E is explore. And this is really beautifully done asynchronously, because it is this moment where we're trying to get students to explore and build up some understanding of the question or the topic. So we might provide a collection of teacher curated resources for them to explore, a collection of articles, podcasts, videos. We might ask them to do their own online research, finding resources on a particular topic. We might also want to really get them engaged in tactile offline exploration. information. Maybe they're going out into the environment to do observations and document those observations. Interview a family member, conduct a simple experiment. So really, we want them testing initial assumptions, engaging in self-directed learning, thinking critically about information, analyzing, synthesizing in this moment. So we don't want to rush kids through the explore section. We want to give them time to really develop some depth in terms of their understanding around the question or topic at the heart of the 5 E's. And the thinking routine from Harvard that I really love at this moment is to challenge kids to complete and connect, extend, challenge, right? So how does what you're learning as you explore connect to what you think you already knew? How is it extending your thinking on this topic? And how is it challenging you? Is there anything that's confusing? Is there something that you're wondering as you engage in this exploration? The third E is explain. And we can challenge students to kind of explain, what did you learn? What did you discover during your exploration? And we can have them do that in real time, in discussions in a classroom, in breakout rooms, or we can have them do it asynchronously with video, where they record and share, this is what I learned, this is what I discovered, this is the questions that I still have. So it's about this moment where we're asking kids to present their learning in a clear and cogent way, sometimes putting complex concepts and vocabulary in their own words. We might want them to start thinking about connections between key concepts and really synthesizing the information that they've learned through their exploration. So depending on the teacher, depending on the learning landscape you're in, this explanation can take the form of small group synchronous kind of presentations to peers, or it can take the form of asynchronous video recordings. And just like with the flipped classroom, the benefit of the video is that kids are in control of creating the recording. So if they make a recording and they don't think it's very good, they can re-record. And when they're watching each other's recordings, they can pause, they can rewind. And maybe if you're using a platform, they can also comment on each other's videos. So creating some space for learners to share what they learned, but then also learn from one another. And then if the teacher needs to jump in with additional explanation, additional models, clarification, they have that opportunity. The fourth E is elaborate. And at the elaborate stage, typically I want students making connections between concepts, really encouraging them to take this new learning and transfer it, applying it to a new and novel situation, which I think works best if they have peer support and work in collaborative groups. And then also engaging them in review and practice and retrieval activities to try to keep that vocabulary and those concepts kind of cemented in their minds. So whether we're, again, using discussion, collaborative group work, online review, concept maps, or even sketch notes, lots of different ways to get kids making connections, transferring their learning, and reviewing and kind of retrieving. Now, the thinking routine I love at the elaborate stage is one that is called I used to think, and now I think. So at the beginning of this exploration, what do they used to think about this topic or this question? What do they think now? And what has caused their thinking to shift or change over the course of this 5 E's instructional model? And then the last E is evaluate. And it was interesting to see in the word cloud you generated that authentic assessments was pretty big, and assessment in general was pretty big. And so when we think about evaluating learning at the end of a 5 E's, I actually encourage teachers to think of 3 things that I encourage them to do. The first is, yes, we want to assess student progress toward learning objectives. What did we want them to understand or to be able to do at the end of this 5 E's instructional model? And how much progress did they make toward that? But what I'd love for teachers to do is focus on authentic assessments, performance tasks, projects. Once we've crafted assessments, performance tasks to measure progress toward learning objectives, encouraging reflection, asking kids, again, to pause. What did you learn? How did you learn it? What questions do you still have? And the third thing I think we all should be doing in this moment when we try anything new is collecting student feedback. What was their experience like? What did they enjoy? What did they find challenging? What recommendations would they make if we were to do this again, this 5E student-centered inquiry? And we can take a lot of different pathways toward assessment. I think assessment's one of those areas of opportunity when it comes to really thinking about student agency and choice. Because what we know about learners is they don't all communicate their learning effectively the same way. They don't all demonstrate their learning effectively the same way. So how do we create opportunities for them to decide, how do I want to surface and share my learning? How do I think I will be most effective as a learner communicating what I learned? So in supporting a team of teachers, we put together a project choice board. So the idea was, at the end of a 5E's instructional model, which is basically a student-centered inquiry experience, what did students want to create to demonstrate their learning? And we tried to appeal to different learners with different interests, right? Different ways in which they might like to communicate their learning. So we have some students who like public speaking. They're very outgoing. So maybe they take the big idea at the heart of the 5Es and craft a TED Talk. And they deliver it either synchronously or asynchronously. For some kids, that's going to sound awful. They would much rather prefer to maybe construct a model, to kind of tinker and build something to show what they learned. We might have students who love to write and they want to take a complex topic and basically communicate it for a younger audience in a children's book, unpacking that complex concept. We might have kids who love technology and they want to design an infographic, a digital story, or a multimedia slideshow. So how do we think about giving them that agency? So even though that 5E's instructional model isn't in the taxonomy of blended learning, if we're really strategic about what happens asynchronously and what happens synchronously, it can take a blended form. And regardless of the model that we're using to design learning, we have to be very thoughtful about what is going to work best in an individual kind of mode or an asynchronous mode, and what's going to work best in a synchronous and possibly collaborative mode. So anytime we ask kids to kind of consume information, doesn't matter if it's a reading, a video, a podcast, a collection of teacher curated resources, it's going to be more successful if students can control that experience, the time, the place, the pace of that experience. So those are all really valuable to potentially couch in an asynchronous mode, whereas engaging in online discussions and personal practice, self-assessment, reflection, these are very individual endeavors as well, and they're going to take students different amounts of time. So again, putting them in an asynchronous mode, students are more likely to be successful, they're more likely to produce things of value because they have more time to engage with them. Collaborative and synchronous learning activities are those that really benefit from human connection and social interaction. So whether that is community building activities, collaborative problem solving tasks, jigsaw activities, experiments and labs, synchronous small group, if we're asking kids to build background on a topic, engage in an interview or a conversation, or even provide peer feedback. These are things that work beautifully in a synchronous mode when we're together in a time and a place together, even if that place is virtual with a, kind of a online class experience. So you have a lot of different models that we can lean on and choose from. And I think for me, that's what I want. I want teachers to get to a place where they have a skill set that is nimble enough, where they can think about objectives, they can think about the learning environment, and they can decide what is the best instructional model for what I'm trying to do, for my population of students, for the learning landscape we're in right now. And then the last part of this conversation is about the tool set. And for me, the beauty of technology, the beauty of these technology tools is that we can work toward really firm goals with our learners but we can allow them flexible pathways and flexible means. So I think the question we have to ask is, are we leveraging technology to prioritize student agency and choice? Are we building those meaningful choices into the learning experience? And when I work with teachers, I talk about three kind of places in the learning where we might want to think about giving students agency. The first is around the what. So is there a lens they can look through? Or is there an aspect of a larger topic they want to focus on? Because teachers are tasked with covering a lot of ground in a school year. And so there's just so much to learn, and giving students opportunities to say, this aspect, this is what I would like to learn. So I've even been in like a third grade classroom where students are studying animals and animal habitats, and they get to choose the animal that they want to focus on as they move through that learning to keep interest and engagement high. The second place is around the how or the process. Can we allow students to decide what steps they move through, what materials they use, whether they complete something online or offline? The more we give them agency around the process, the more likely they are to feel confident in completing whatever the task or the assignment is. And then the last place is really around the why, and having a lot of clarity about why are students doing a particular assignment, completing a particular project, and what would they like to produce to demonstrate that they learned. So they have to understand the value so they can make a decision about what they want to create to demonstrate that they in fact learned. Now, one of the things I think is challenging for teachers is it's a little overwhelming, this idea of student choice. You know, our jobs are complicated, we don't have a lot of time, but the choice can start very simply with two options, kind of taking this would you rather mentality and applying it to our design work. Would you rather read this or watch this? Work on your own, work with a partner, make connections in a piece of writing or in a concept map. They don't have to be like 10 different options. It could be two different options that give students a meaningful choice. That's where we can start when it comes to student agency. Do you want to, type a response or record a video? What would be most effective for you? And then as we start to get more comfortable with student agency, we can really position learners at the center of the experience. So if we're going to start kind of work on a scientific phenomenon or a mathematical process, maybe we let kids kind of lead the way and we engage them in kind of a choice board adventure, right? Where they're deciding, how do I want to learn about this scientific phenomenon? How do I want to learn about this mathematical process? Do I want to read? Would I like to watch a video? Would I enjoy a kid-friendly podcast? And then maybe once they've had like an initial exposure to this new information, we want to nudge them to go deeper. How are they going to explore? Are they going to do online research? Are they going to go out in their home or backyard environment to observe and document a phenomenon? Are they going to have a conversation with somebody to learn about something? Or are they going to tinker? Are they going to build? Are they going to conduct a simple experiment to test an idea? And then once they've had a chance to go through this process, how do they want to articulate what they learned? Do they want to record a short video, complete a piece of writing, or do something more visual and artistic, like a flow chart or a concept map? So there are lots of different ways to create what I like to call a choose your learning path adventure, where we're really trying to position the learners at the center of the experience and giving them options and choices throughout the experience. And a choose your learning path adventure, much like a playlist, can free the teacher to pull individual students, work with small groups of learners as students self-pace through the experience. Now, when we talk about technology, I had Paul France on my podcast, and we were talking about technology use. And he described these 4 questions that he wants teachers to ask when they use technology, and I loved them. The first is, does the technology minimize complexity? Because it absolutely should. If the technology makes the task more complex, then we need to be questioning whether we should be using it or whether we're just using it for technology's sake. Second question, does technology maximize individual power and potential? I think it does when we really prioritize student agency. Third, thinking about, does technology help us reimagine learning? Is it helping us to kind of engage kids in new and novel ways? And 4, is technology preserving or enhancing human connection? And this last one is so important because I see a lot of educators who use technology to isolate learners, not connect them. So when I work with teachers around designing blended learning lessons, we're talking about how do we prioritize the 4 C's of 21st century learning when we use technology? Are we encouraging kids to think critically, engage in communication, to collaborate around shared tasks, and to be creative? I think for technology to really be as powerful as we all want it to be, designing through the lens of these 4 C's and prioritizing these 4 C's when we design our online learning experiences is critical, because technology has the potential to bring kids together to help them be more productive when they are working together. So my advice for anybody who's feeling a little overwhelmed by the current moment about the idea of shifting to these blended learning models is think big, get excited, start small, right? It's easy. I think teachers, we tend to be highly excitable. We want to kind of do everything at once. We want to create these amazing experiences for kids, but this shift to blended learning is going to be more sustainable if we make small adjustments and build on a series of small wins over time. So start with one model. Know that you're going to make some mistakes, and that's okay. It's all part of the learning process. But as you play with blended learning, really think about that partnership and focus on, are these models allowing me to engage more with my learners, to embrace the human side of teaching, to support kids and facilitate learning? Because they absolutely should. Embrace your roles as lead learners in the classroom. Again, if students see you experimenting, trying new things, asking for feedback, potentially kind of failing with a model and saying, that didn't go how I thought it would. How might we do it differently next time? Then it's communicating to everybody in the class that it's not just the students learning, we're all learning together. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. I know we talk a lot about growth mindset when it comes to students, but we need to talk about it when it comes to teachers. Like, I want teachers to use the word yet more often. I haven't mastered that yet. I don't feel confident with that technology yet. It doesn't mean you won't master it. It doesn't mean you won't become really proficient. You just aren't there yet. It's a process, and that's okay. Prioritize differentiation, student agency, student control over the pace of learning as you design with these different models, because that's what makes them really effective. And leverage that technology, leverage online resources and tools to create those flexible pathways. So not every student is moving lockstep through the same experience, which might not be a great fit for them. Creating those flexible pathways means all students have the opportunity to make progress toward firm goals. And just give yourself space, permission, grace to experiment, to grow, to fail, and to learn, because we're all learning a lot right now. And I know it can be uncomfortable, but it can also be really exciting. So I do see there's a lot of questions, and I'm happy to field as many of those as possible. And again, I do have a bunch of books available for anybody who wants to dig into any of these topics more in depth. I'm also, you obviously have my website. There's a ton of resources there. I share a lot of templates and strategies. And if you want to connect online, I'm on Twitter. I'm very active. I'm also on Instagram. So wherever you hang out online, if you have questions, you guys can find me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tucker, for sharing to us excellent ideas and advice on blended learning based on your experience. We could feel your great passion for teaching. No wonder you're voted as the Teacher of the Year. Let us give Dr. Tucker a round of big applause.
Thank you.
In your talk, we get the idea that blended learning is an in thing in the current teaching learning process, where there is a limited face-to-face classroom instruction. The shift from teacher-paced to blended learning is incredibly demanding, and hence flexibility among teachers and students is very much necessary. But as you said, having the proper mindset skill set and tool set, applying blended learning will become an effective strategy in the teaching learning process. In the interest of time, however, we will entertain only 1 to 2 questions, but as Dr. Tucker mentioned, you can directly talk to her through her Twitter account at Catlin_Tucker and her award-winning blog, thecatlintucker.com. Sir LJ, can we flash the 2 questions? Okay, the first question: what are the challenges of implementing blended learning based on your experience? How did you address such challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges, honestly, are teacher and student mindset, right? So the idea that teachers feel like I have to be at the front of the room, I have to explain things to students, I have to do whole group instruction because that's what they're familiar with. So kind of playing with these models and starting to feel the difference between working with a class of 30 plus students versus working with a group of 6 to 8 learners, teachers start to feel that they are more effective. So it starts to move kind of I think it starts to change their perspective, but it's hard. At first, I definitely work with teachers where they kind of feel like, you know what I've been doing, it kind of works for me. I don't know if I want to change practice. And my nudge is always, is it working for learners? But then I think it's also one of the challenges of blended learning is we're asking kids to do more. We're asking them to take this active, engaged role. And it's quite frankly, much more cognitively and socially challenging to be a student in a blended learning, student-centered environment than a traditional teacher-led environment. There's much more pressure on them to engage and question and think critically. And I think over the course of a school year, as kids get emerged into that role, they start to feel the benefit. You know, they feel that they are learning, they feel more engaged. And so it's this positive kind of feedback loop. But I really feel like the biggest challenges I face are just these kind of very traditional assumptions about what it means and what it looks like to be a teacher and what it means and what it looks like to be a student. And I think some of that just has to be reimagined.
Yes, thank you very much. We go to the second question. Sir LJ. The second question. Sir LJ.
Marisa, it's already in the screen, ma'am.
Oh. The second question is, where's the second? With the varied teaching methods, how will you know that this is the perfect fit to this particular topic? Do we need to do trial and error first?
I think really the goal is, and from my perspective, is I think of teachers as having kind of like a tool belt, right? And we need multiple instructional models in our tool belt. There is no one tool that is going to fix all of our problems, right? Like there's no one tool that fixes all the problems we have when we're working on fixing stuff around our homes. And the same thing is true in classrooms. So I think teachers should try the model that piques their interest, that seems like the best fit first. So maybe you try a playlist model or the 5Es instructional model or the station rotation model, and you work with it and you try to figure out which learning objectives will this model be most useful for. So maybe you use station rotation because kids are working on a performance task and you want to give them feedback at your teacher-led station. Or maybe you're pursuing an essential question in science, and so you want to use the 5Es instructional model. So it's not that you have to learn them all at once, and it's not that any one model will be a good fit for all of the problems or challenges you'll face or all the learning objectives you're working toward. The goal really needs to be to develop proficiency with multiple models so that we as educators can design with a higher degree of intentionality, pairing the model we're using with the objectives and the student population we're working with.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Catlin Tucker, for the presentation. Now we are going to move on to the awarding of our certificate in recognition of the presentation of Dr. Catlin Tucker. The certificate reads, Republic of the Philippines, Department of Science and Education, Department of Science and Technology, Science Education Institute, Science Teacher Academy for the Regions. Award the certificate of recognition to Dr. Catlin Tucker for her invaluable contribution as plenary speaker at the second DOST Project STAR International Conference with the theme Innovations, Challenges, and Transformations in STEM Education, Moving Forward in a Post-Pandemic World, held from November 16 to 18, 2021. Signed, Dr. Giuseppe Bio, PhD, Director of the DOST SEI. Thank you very much, Dr. Catlin Tucker.
Thank you.